Single. Dad, Janitor, mocked in Arabic by Billionaire. Seconds later, he replied with ancient grace. If he's going to mop the marble, someone should teach him not to look like he owns the place. The words sliced through the air like glass. The laughter that followed echoed across the vaulted lobby of Alaratech's corporate tower, thick with cologne ambition and disdain. Jonas Hale didn't flinch. He wrung out the mop with quiet precision, the soft squeak of water on marble, the only sound he allowed himself. The navy jumpsuit he wore bore the signs of long labor, worn at the cuffs, faded at the seams, but he wore it like a man wears a name he's chosen to carry, even when the world forgets how to say it with respect. Behind him, a group of investors in tailored suits lingered outside the private gala room, drinks in hand, posturing for deals and dominance. The man who'd spoken, Rashid Farouk, leaned on his cane like a king surveying a jester. His laugh, sharp and indulgent, rang again. "Do you understand me?" Rashid added in a clipped accent and smooth Arabic. "Or should I speak slower for the help?" Another round of chuckles. Jonas dipped the mop into the bucket once more. The chandelier light reflected on the marble like liquid gold, and for a second it caught the faint shimmer of ink on his forearm just beneath the rolled sleeve. An old tattoo, almost invisible now, a sigil few would recognize unless they'd spent time in ancient libraries or war zones. He stood, turned, and in perfect Arabic said quietly, "The floor may reflect your wealth, sir, but only your words reveal your worth." The silence that followed was instant. Rashid's smirk withered the glass of wine in his hand, pausing midair. One woman gasped softly. Someone at the back coughed. Jonas offered no smile, no gloat, just a single respectful nod and returned to his work. From the mezzanine above, Evelyn Hart watched everything. She hadn't intended to stop. Her schedule that evening was precise to the minute: greet the delegates, deliver the welcome toast sign, the final expansion deal. But something about the way that Janitor moved, steady, deliberate, unbothered by the noise around him, had caught her attention. And now this. A janitor who responded to a billionaire's insult not with shame or anger, but with ancient tongue and undeniable grace. She took a sip of her water, suddenly unsure of its taste. Down below, Jonas wheeled his cart toward the service hallway. His hands were steady, but inside his chest his heart had begun its usual quiet ache. Luca was waiting. In the dimly lit maintenance room behind a row of cleaning supplies and dusty lockers, an old cushioned chair sat by a mini-table. On it, a math workbook, 2 crayons, and a half-eaten granola bar. "Hey, buddy," Jonas whispered, crouching beside the boy. "Sorry, it took a little longer." Luca looked up with bright eyes and the kind of tired only kids could wear with hope. "It's okay. I was drawing spaceships. This one's got solar sails." Jonas smiled. "Can I ride in one someday? Only if you bring snacks." Luca grinned. "And not the carrot ones." "Deal." Jonas ruffled his son's hair, then sat down on the floor beside him. "You hungry?" Luca shook his head, then leaned closer. "Dad, why did that man yell at you?" Jonas hesitated. He could have lied, said it was a joke, that the man was just being silly. But Luca was already learning how the world worked, and tonight wasn't about shielding him. It was about showing him. "He thought he was better than me," Jonas said softly, "because of what I wear, because of what I do. But you spoke his language, yeah." Luca tilted his head. Then, why did he look scared after Jonas chuckled once? "Because some people aren't afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being seen." In the gala room, Rashid sat stiffly, the wine forgotten. Around him, the mood had shifted. Conversations were quieter. Faces turned toward Evelyn Hart as she stepped onto the small stage near the head table. The CEO of Alaratech stood poised in a tailored black suit that shimmered subtly beneath the chandeliers. She was beautiful in the way glaciers are sharp, timeless, and likely to crush you if you underestimated the weight of her silence. But tonight, her voice held something different. "Before I begin," she said, eyes scanning the room, "I want to acknowledge something unexpected." She paused, letting the silence stretch. Dignity doesn't always enter through the front doors. Sometimes it comes in with a mop and a steady hand. A murmur passed through the room. Evelyn's gaze settled briefly on Rashid. He looked away. Later that night, long after the last guest had left, Jonas returned to the lobby for one final round. The marble glistened under the soft lights. He worked slowly, deliberately, his body knowing the rhythm better than any music. He didn't need applause or defense. He just needed to know he'd kept his son warm, fed, and proud. From behind, soft heels clicked. He turned. Evelyn stood a few feet away, arms folded, expression unreadable. "You speak Arabic," she said simply. Jonas nodded. "And Latin, and Farsi, and bits of Greek," he added, "enough to get through a library or a war zone." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not in your HR file. I didn't think it was relevant to floor waxing." A beat of silence. Then she asked, "Why are you really here, Merhail?" Jonas looked at her. Really looked. The world saw a billionaire, but her eyes told a different story. There was something in them that had been cracked once and carefully glued back, beautiful but fragile. So he answered her not with the truth she expected, but with one that mattered more. "Because I have a son who deserves to see that even if the world calls you small, you can still stand tall. Say something true and walk out with your dignity." She stared at him, and for the first time that night Evelyn Hart smiled. Not the smile for cameras, not the tight corporate grin. A real one. The kind that said, maybe, just maybe, this story isn't over yet. The video hit 5 million views before sunrise. A single 30-second clip, shaky and grainy, filmed from behind a velvet curtain by a catering assistant with quick fingers and a better sense of justice than most in the room. It captured everything, the insult in Arabic, the hush that followed, and Jonas Hale standing tall with a mop in hand delivering his reply like a quiet storm. By morning, the headlines bloomed like wildfire across screens. Janitor silences billionaire with one sentence. Dignity on marble floors. The man who didn't flinch, who is Jonas Hale. Inside the Alara Tech Tower, whispers moved faster than the elevators. Jonas walked the same halls he had for months, but today something felt different. The stairs weren't the same. They weren't mocking or dismissive. They were confused, curious, and, beneath that, uneasy. He moved like he always did, quiet, efficient, no wasted motion. But now, every step echoed a little louder in the marble corridors, as if the floor itself had begun to listen. In the executive wing, Evelyn Hart's office remained closed, the blinds drawn. She hadn't addressed the board yet, and speculation simmered like a pot about to boil over. At 9:43 a.m., a message pinged in Jonas's inbox, a place he rarely checked. "Please come to the 48th floor. Office 312. No security escort needed. E.H." He stared at the screen for a long moment before slowly removing his gloves, washing his hands, and straightening the collar of his jumpsuit. He didn't change. He didn't need to. The elevator ride was silent. Floor after floor of glass and power blinked past him like memories he had locked away until the doors slid open with a chime revealing minimalist elegance and a view of the city that seemed to hover above the noise of the world. Office 312 had no nameplate, just frosted glass slightly ajar. Jonas stepped in. Evelyn stood near the window arms, folded her profile backlit by daylight and the steel bones of the skyline. She didn't turn. "How does it feel," she asked, "to have the world watching you for something you never asked to be seen?" Jonas closed the door behind him, like walking into a room that was always there. Only now the lights are on. She turned at that, her eyes tired but sharp. "You're not a janitor." "I'm not." He raised an eyebrow. "Not just one." He smiled faintly. "No one ever is." She studied him, then crossed to a side table and pressed play on a tablet. The video began again, the moment from last night. The insult, the reply, the silence. Evelyn paused it right at the end, just as Jonas turned back to his mop, dignity intact. That she said quietly was one of the most controlled acts of power I've ever witnessed. It wasn't about power. No, she challenged. It was about Luca. That name landed like a quiet bell in the room. "My son," Jonas explained, stepping closer. "He was there last night. sitting in the back room behind the janitor's closet. He heard everything. Evelyn blinked. And you still chose calm. Jonas looked her in the eye. He doesn't need a father who fights. He needs a man who endures without becoming bitter. That silence between them stretched again, not awkward, but reverent. Evelyn exhaled. You know they want to fire you. He didn't blink. Of course. I'm not going to let them. You might not have a choice. Her voice sharpened. You think I've built all this to be told what I can and can't protect. You built this, Jonas said gently, to save something. I don't think you even remember what anymore. She froze. It wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror. Meanwhile, in the employee break room, a cluster of workers huddled around someone's phone. That guy mops the West Wing, right? Yeah, with the kid who reads comic books in the janitor's closet. You ever heard him talk like that? Not even close. A maintenance supervisor sipped his coffee. People like him. They come in quiet. They leave a mark loud. That afternoon, Luca sat on a folding chair in the back of the building watching cartoons on a dusty tablet while sketching in a notepad. Jonas had given him that pad months ago, told him every superhero started with a pencil. Today's drawing a man in a jumpsuit holding a mop like a sword facing a mountain of suits and ties. The caption in crooked block letters read, "Real power doesn't yell." Evelyn sat across from her board hours later. The room was cold, not from temperature, but from tension. Trent Malden, COO and golden boy of Alaritech's public image, folded his hands. This isn't about politics, he said smoothly. It's about optics. Our shareholders are watching this unfold like a circus. We can't let a janitor become the face of the company overnight. Evelyn didn't blink. Maybe he's the only one in this room whose face belongs on it. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. He made your guest look like a fool in 3 languages, Trent pressed. You think that plays well in Riyadh? He didn't insult anyone. Evelyn shot back. He answered with dignity. Trent leaned in. And what happens when people dig deeper? You think a man with that level of education just decided one day to clean toilets for a living? There's a story there. And stories, they rot when left in the dark. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then maybe it's time we told it ourselves. That night, Jonas returned to the janitor's closet. Luca was asleep in the old chair, arms wrapped around his backpack. Jonas pulled a blanket over him, then sat on the floor back against the wall staring into the quiet hum of pipes and silence. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but tonight he had kept his promise. He had stood, without shouting, without breaking, without hiding, and somewhere far above in the corner office of glass and concrete, Evelyn, Hart watched the security footage one last time. Not the viral video, but a silent, grainy clip from earlier that day. Jonas sitting beside his son brushing crumbs from his jacket whispering something, before pulling him into a hug. She watched it twice, then turned off the screen and whispered to the dark, "He's not the story the world wants. But he might be the one it needs." There are truths so heavy they warp time. Jonas Hale sat in the back of a faded city bus as it hummed toward the edge of Queens, his gloved hands resting quietly on his knees. The sunrise hadn't broken yet, but he didn't need light to remember where the past lived. The folder Evelyn had handed him still sat unopened in his work satchel. She had given it to him the night before, with nothing more than a look and a soft, "You deserve to know what they tried to bury." But Jonas wasn't sure he wanted to dig up bones that had already cost him everything. Luca slept soundly beside him, his head on his father's arm, still in his pajamas beneath an oversized hoodie. They were on their way to a weekend shift early enough that the world was still pretending to be quiet. Jonas had been pretending longer. The old university campus hadn't changed much. Same ivy-choked stone buildings, same creaking benches with brass memorial plaques, same coffee shop he used to grade papers in, and just beyond the South Library the lecture hall where everything had come undone. He didn't take Luca inside. Instead, they sat on the steps sharing a bag of warm breakfast rolls. "Is this where you used to work?" Luca asked between bites. Jonas nodded. "A long time ago. What did you do here?" He thought for a moment. I asked hard questions, then tried to teach people how to live inside the answers. Luca frowned thoughtfully. That sounds like a superpower. Jonas chuckled. It felt like one, until someone decided it was too dangerous. Flashback. 8 years earlier, Jonas stood in front of a lecture hall packed with students. Chalk in hand, passion in his voice. Language, he said, underlining the word with a bold swipe, isn't just how we communicate. It's how we reveal what we believe. It's how we pass down wounds, and how we heal from them. Applause had followed. So did jealousy. The accusation came swiftly. A journal article one of his proudest suddenly flagged for questionable sourcing. He'd cited a defunct reference, a citation error easily corrected. But by then, whispers had already turned to judgment. His funding vanished. His tenure vote delayed indefinitely. Then quietly denied. What no one knew was that the review board had included Trent Malden, then an ambitious trustee, now COO of Elara Tech. Jonas had taken the fall, not because he was guilty, but because fighting would have made him something worse, a bitter man in front of a child who needed peace more than pride. Back in the present, Jonas unfolded the letter Evelyn had tucked into the folder. It was the original tenure recommendation signed by 3 out of 4 trustees. The missing signature, Trent Malden's. Attached was an internal memo, recommend delaying tenure vote, pending outcome of internal review. Potential leverage over emerging research area if independent funding is disrupted. Jonas closed the folder slowly. So it had been real, all of it. The silence he'd lived inside wasn't noble. It had been engineered. That evening, Evelyn waited for him by the freight elevator. "I wasn't sure you'd want to talk," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure I'd want to feel." Jonas replied. She hesitated. What they did, it was calculated. You could take it public now. They'd believe you. Jonas shook his head. It's not about what they'd believe. It's about what I'd become. Evelyn studied him. You think staying silent has kept you safe? No, he said, voice low, but it kept me kind. That line caught her. You really think kindness survives in silence? Jonas met her eyes. It has to, or everything I've built with Luca falls apart. She didn't look away. And what if your silence costs more now? What if it's not just your story anymore? Jonas leaned against the wall, tired in a way she recognized but rarely saw in mirrors. I used to think truth was the most powerful thing a man could wield, he murmured. But I've learned. And timing. It's the sharper blade. Evelyn swallowed hard. And what does your timing say now? He hesitated, then looked at her. Not as a CEO, but as a woman who had fought her own wars behind boardroom doors. It says, maybe it's time to stop whispering. That night, after Luca had gone to bed, Jonas opened the second envelope Evelyn had included. Inside was a photo faded, but powerful. Him, Evelyn, and a team of researchers standing beside a presentation banner, Cognitive Recovery Through Cross-Linguistic Therapy. Her hair was shorter then, his eyes less guarded. He hadn't realized she'd been on that grant team. She hadn't reminded him. Beneath the photo, a note in Evelyn's handwriting. We were building something honest once. Maybe we still can. The next day, Evelyn entered the boardroom 5 minutes early. Trent was already there sipping espresso like it owed him money. Rough press cycle, he asked with a smirk. She sat without responding. You can't protect him forever, Ev. The world will sniff him out. What happens when they find out who he really was? Evelyn folded her hands. Then maybe they'll also find out who you really are. Trent's jaw tensed, but his smile didn't fade. She leaned forward slightly, tone calm but slicing. You picked the wrong janitor to underestimate. Downstairs, Jonas wiped down the elevator buttons as the brass gleamed back at him. A reflection of someone he hadn't seen in years, a man with nothing to prove and nothing left to hide. From behind, a quiet voice broke the hum. You're not just a janitor, are you? He turned. A young analyst, barely 25, with a lanyard that still smelled like fresh ink. Jonas smiled gently. Depends on the day. She hesitated. That thing you said, about your son needing a father who endures. That wasn't just for him, was it?" Jonas paused, then nodded. "No, it was for anyone who's ever been invisible in a room full of noise." That night, Evelyn stood by her office window once more watching the city flicker. Her phone buzzed. A new post was trending. "A janitor's words are redefining leadership, and we're listening." She smiled just a little, then whispered, "Let them listen. He hasn't even started speaking yet." The rain tapped against the windows of the janitor's break room like a metronome set to memory. Jonas Hale sat on the floor beside his son, a warm thermos of soup between them and an old quilt folded twice to cushion the concrete beneath their legs. Luca, curled into his side in his oversized hoodie, was staring up at the ceiling like it held constellations. His sketchbook rested on his lap, a pencil tucked behind one ear. "You ever wish," the boy asked softly, "you had a different job?" Jonas paused. The question came not as a challenge, but as an invitation. "I used to teach," he said carefully, "in a place with big doors, big ideas, and even bigger egos. Did they like you?" Jonas chuckled. "Some did. Some didn't. But the ones who listened, they carried what we learned with them." Luca picked up his sketchbook, flipping it to a new page. "Why'd you stop?" Jonas exhaled slowly. "Because sometimes, even when you build something with your whole heart, someone else can come in and decide it's not theirs to respect." He looked at his son. "But I didn't stop learning. Or teaching. I just changed the classroom." Luca stared at his father for a long moment, then quietly said, "Then I guess I'm your student now." Jonas's throat tightened. "You've always been." The next morning, Jonas brought Luca with him to Alaritech's West Wing. It was a Saturday quiet, no suits, no meetings, just the hum of motion sensors and auto-locking doors. The boy carried a worn backpack filled with snacks, a paperback on Greek mythology, and the ever-present sketchbook. Evelyn noticed them through the security monitor in her office. She'd stayed overnight in the executive suite, unable to sleep. Something about seeing Jonas walking the halls like he belonged here again stirred a ripple under the calm surface she kept polished. She stepped out just as Jonas and Luca turned the corner. Luca's eyes lit up. "Miss Evelyn?" She crouched down to his height, ignoring the ridiculousness of doing so in Louboutin heels. "Good morning, Professor Hale." He giggled. "That's my dad." Evelyn smiled. "Must run in the family." Her gaze shifted to Jonas, quieter now. "I could give him a tour," she offered. Jonas tilted his head. "The penthouse suite?" "No," she said. "The place where ideas used to matter." 10 minutes later, they stood in the abandoned Level 6 lab. Dust still clung to the edges of the glass partitions. The smart whiteboards were unplugged, their last notes half erased but barely visible. Formulas, diagrams, a child's stick figure added in blue marker, likely by a visiting intern. Luca's eyes went wide. "This place looks like Iron Man's garage." Jonas laughed. "Except no one ever built the suit." Evelyn walked slowly to one of the desks, running her fingers along the surface. "This was your space, wasn't it?" she asked. Jonas nodded. "It was ours. Me and 4 researchers who believed language wasn't just communication, it was recovery, healing, rebuilding the map of the mind." Evelyn's voice dropped. "Until the funding disappeared, until someone pulled the plug." Jonas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Luca wandered to a shelf of untouched books. "Did you ever help people walk again?" Jonas turned to him, smiling. "Nobody. But I helped them remember how to ask for water, or say their daughter's name again, or smile when they heard a song they once loved." Luca stared, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's even better." They left the lab an hour later, silent in the elevator. But something lingered in the air, something Evelyn couldn't quite name. Reverence, maybe, or the weight of all the things left unfinished. As the elevator descended, she turned to Jonas. "Why didn't you tell me you were part of the neurolinguistics recovery trials?" she asked. "I figured if you wanted to know, you would have asked." "I didn't know where to start." Jonas's voice was low but steady. "Start where it hurts." She looked at him, then really looked and said, "I'm tired of hurting in private. That evening, Jonas and Luca walked home beneath a pale sky streaked with lavender. They passed a street performer playing a violin with a bow held together by duct tape. Luca stopped pulling a single crumpled dollar from his pocket and dropping it into the open case. Jonas smiled. "You didn't have to do that," he said gently. Luca shrugged. "He's playing like someone's listening." Jonas knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's the kind of man I hope you grow up to be." Meanwhile, Evelyn returned to her office and pulled out a folder marked Archive Hale, 2016. Inside were notes from a forgotten ethics hearing, Jonas's handwritten statements, and an internal memo she had never seen before. The memo wasn't from Jonas. It was from Trent. If we shift the grant attribution quietly, we can fold the methodology into Alara's proprietary portfolio without triggering IP conflict. Hale's resistance makes him a liability. Her breath caught. He hadn't just been discarded. He'd been robbed. The next morning, Evelyn knocked on the janitor's office door for the first time in her life. Jonas opened it surprised to see her standing there in jeans and a gray cardigan, not a suit. "I found something," she said, holding out the memo. He read it in silence. When he finished, he exhaled, long and slow. "I always suspected, but seeing it written." She nodded. "I don't know how to fix what they broke." He looked at her eyes, kind. "Maybe it starts with not pretending it didn't happen." She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Jonas, what would you build if I gave you one floor, one budget, and no limits?" He didn't answer right away, but after a moment he smiled, genuine, almost startled by its own freedom. "I'd build a room where people remember who they are, even after the world makes them forget." That night, Jonas tucked Luca into bed. The boy blinked sleepily, already halfway to dreams. "Dad, yeah, that thing you said to Miss Evelyn, about remembering who you are." Jonas ran his hand gently through his son's hair. "What about it?" Luca yawned. "Do you think I'll ever forget who I am?" Jonas leaned close, whispered, "Not as long as I'm around to remind you." There's a kind of silence that only exists in luxury dining rooms where the silverware is too polished, the laughter too rehearsed, and the air so still it feels like judgment waiting to happen. Jonas Hale stepped into that silence with a mop in one hand and a bucket that squeaked slightly against the marble floor. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not tonight. But two of the janitorial staff had called in sick, and Evelyn herself had requested a trusted replacement for the event, the quarterly investor dinner, where smiles were sharp and secrets sharper. And so Jonas entered the lion's den, not as a guest, not as a man of credentials or voice, but as the janitor. Again. Across the room, Trent Malden adjusted his cufflinks and cast a glance toward the service entrance. "Oh, look who's decided to bless us with his mop," he murmured to the woman on his right, a socialite with skin-tight pearls and a history of swallowing reputations for sport. "That's the janitor from the video, isn't it?" she asked, sipping her wine. Trent smiled. "The one and only. Fame has a short fuse. Let's see how long it takes to burn out." He stood and raised his glass theatrically. To Alara Tech he toasted, and to knowing your place in the world even if it's holding a mop near the power table. Polite laughter rippled across the room. Jonas didn't react. He rolled the bucket past the table, ignoring the low chuckles and the flash of a phone camera catching him at just the right unflattering angle. But Evelyn noticed. From the head of the table she watched the way Trent's eyes followed Jonas, how calculated his jabs were, how deliberate the mockery. She knew this wasn't coincidence. It was a test. Of power, of dignity, of silence. Halfway through the entree, a new insult landed, this time from a media exec sitting too close to the wine. "Tell me something, Hale," he called out. "You planning to teach your son how to mop marble too? Or does he get a better deal?" A few guests snorted. One clapped. Jonas turned slowly, set his mop down gently, and replied, "I teach my son to clean up after others. Whether that's floors or character, depends on who's in the room." It hit like a slow-burning match, the kind that doesn't explode but simmers. Evelyn's lips parted. She wasn't expecting him to speak, but when he did, the room shifted. Later, as dessert was being served, Evelyn stood. She tapped a spoon gently against her glass. "I'd like to thank you all for coming," she began, her voice smooth but weighted. "Tonight was meant to be about progress, growth, future partnerships." She paused, then turned her eyes toward Jonas. "But I've learned something more valuable tonight. That integrity doesn't require a title, and that sometimes the quietest man in the room has the most to teach us." Trent's expression froze. The room, unsure of where to land, teetered between discomfort and curiosity. Evelyn continued. "This company was built on innovation, but the truth is, what makes us sustainable isn't just our tech, it's our people, the ones who hold it together when no one's watching." She raised her glass toward Jonas. "To the ones who endure, and remind us what character looks like without saying a word." This time, the applause didn't feel polite. It felt real, and it left Trent sitting in a silence he couldn't spin. After the dinner, Evelyn caught Jonas near the service hall. He was rinsing out the mop sleeves rolled back turned. "That was something," she said softly. He glanced over his shoulder. "You mean the toast, or the humiliation before it? Both." He rinsed his hands, wiped them on a cloth. "You shouldn't have said that in front of them." "Why not?" "Because people like Trent don't forget when someone shifts the light away from them." She stepped closer. "Good. Maybe he needs to stand in the shadows for once." Jonas gave a low chuckle. "You really want to start a war with the man running your profits?" Evelyn held his gaze. "Maybe I'm ready to run this place on something more valuable than fear." She paused. "What you said about Luca, it stayed with me." He shrugged. "Sometimes the simplest truths land the hardest." Evelyn looked down for a moment. "You're not just here to mop floors." "No," he said gently, "but I'll keep doing it anyway." "Why?" "Because it's honest work, and because it keeps me close to what matters." She studied him, her voice quieter now. "And what matters to you, Jonas?" He hesitated. Then with no pride, no pretense, he replied, "That my son never sees me become the kind of man I've spent my life protecting him from." That hit her deeper than she expected. A crack, a shift. The next morning, social media exploded. Someone had posted a clip of the toast. The video was grainy, but the audio crystal clear. The janitor just ended the entire room with a single sentence. "Who is this guy, and why do I want to vote for him?" More CEOs should be like Evelyn Hart, and more men should be like Jonas Hale. Trent saw it too. He threw his phone across his desk and growled into the silence, "He's becoming a liability." That night in the quiet of their apartment, Jonas read Luca a story. The boy lay curled beneath a patchwork quilt, his breath slowing, his thumb resting just beneath his chin the way he always did when sleep approached. Jonas closed the book and brushed the hair from Luca's forehead. "Dad," the boy mumbled. "Yeah. Were they mean to you again?" Jonas paused, then said honestly, "Some were." "Did it hurt?" Jonas smiled softly. "Only a little, but sometimes the truth makes the hurt worth it." Luca blinked sleepily. "Did you win?" Jonas kissed his son's forehead. "No, but I stayed true, and that's better than winning." Jonas Hale never checked the mailbox on Mondays. It was a habit carved by disappointment bills ads and the occasional reminder that life was still counting his debts one envelope at a time. But on this particular Monday, something felt off. The air was too still, the building too quiet. And when he opened the metal door to box 2B, it wasn't an overdue notice that stared back at him. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering and a gold seal stamped in the corner. Elara, Tech, Foundation, Scholarship Division. He stood there for a beat too long, then two. Then he tore it open with fingers that hadn't trembled in years. Inside, one line changed everything. "We are pleased to inform you that Luca Hale has been awarded a full academic scholarship to Brightbridge Academy." Jonas blinked. Then he reread it 3 times. He turned the envelope over, checked the date, checked the name again. It was real. It wasn't a joke, or a PR stunt, or a favor wrapped in pity. It was a lifeline. Brightbridge Academy wasn't just any school. It was the kind of place where future senators sat beside tech prodigies, where Latin was taught before algebra, where the cafeteria served grilled salmon instead of mystery meat, and tuition. A number so high, Jonas once joked it was more than he'd made in 3 years combined. He sank onto the edge of the stairwell, the letter trembling in his hands. Then he did something he hadn't done in months. He cried. "Is it a good envelope or a bad one?" Luca asked later that night, swinging his feet from the kitchen chair. Jonas smiled, holding the letter behind his back. "Depends. How do you feel about wearing a uniform and being surrounded by kids who probably own horses?" Luca's eyes widened. "Like real horses." "Probably. Maybe even ponies." Luca squinted. "Do they allow weird kids?" Jonas knelt beside him, ruffling his hair. "They do now." The next morning, Jonas stood outside Evelyn's office, the letter folded neatly in his jacket pocket. He didn't knock, just hovered, until her assistant Helen glanced up from her screen and gave a knowing smirk. "She's inside." And yes, she asked not to be disturbed. "But you're not. Most people are you?" He cleared his throat. Did you have anything to do with this?" he asked, slipping the letter across the counter. Helen's eyes scanned the header. She blinked, then shook her head slowly. "No, but I did help file the finalist shortlist. Luca was there on merit." Jonas's brow furrowed. "You mean—" "The essay," she nodded, "the one about the broken music box." Jonas went still. "That story made 2 board members cry," she added, smiling. He wrote, "It wasn't the melody that made me love it. It was the fact that Dad fixed it even when he was tired." Jonas's breath caught. Helen leaned in, her voice gentle. "Your son didn't get this because of you. He got it because of who you've helped him become." Later that evening, as the city faded into dusk, Evelyn found Jonas on the rooftop terrace, a place he went when the world felt too loud. "You're not going to thank me again, are you?" she teased, walking up beside him. Jonas shook his head. "Turns out—" "It wasn't you." She raised a brow. "Disappointed, no, just humbled." A pause, then she asked, "Why didn't you tell me you applied?" He hesitated. "Because I didn't want it to look like charity. Or worse, like I was using you." Evelyn folded her arms, watching him. "Jonas, if you were using me, you're doing a pretty terrible job at it." He laughed quietly. Then he turned to face her. He wrote about the music box. She blinked. "What music box?" He exhaled, eyes distant. "It was my late wife's. It broke the night she passed. I never got around to fixing it, not until months later. I didn't think he noticed." Evelyn's voice softened. "Kids always notice what we think they miss. And sometimes that's where their strength comes from." Jonas nodded slowly. The wind picked up. A strand of her hair drifted across her cheek, and instinctively he brushed it back. Their eyes locked. For a moment, too long, and too real. "Do you ever think," he murmured, "that the things we try hardest to hide are the very things that make us worth seeing?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "Only every day." The next morning, Jonas walked Luca to the gates of Brightbridge Academy. The boy's backpack looked too big for his shoulders, but his eyes burned with pride. "You nervous?" Jonas asked. Luca shrugged. "Not really. I mean, a little. But you said brave people do stuff even when it scares them, right?" Jonas smiled, kneeling beside him. "Exactly." Luca wrapped his arms around his father's neck. "Thanks for fixing the music box." Jonas held him tight. "Thank you for hearing it." As Luca disappeared through the gates, Jonas stood for a long time watching. He thought about his wife, about second chances, and how sometimes the smallest victories, like a folded envelope, can open the biggest doors. Inside her office, Evelyn watched the same scene through the security feed. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply whispered to herself, "One right choice at a time, and maybe we all get where we're meant to be." The Hart residence wasn't cold, but it was quiet, too quiet for a home that large. Evelyn stood barefoot in her sleek, modern kitchen, staring at a half-prepared salad she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. Outside the tall windows, the Manhattan skyline flickered in gold and silver, but inside, everything felt still. She heard the knock before she realized she'd been waiting for it. When she opened the door, Jonas stood there with Luca by his side. He'd dressed plainly as always, dark button-down shirt sleeves rolled up, no pretense. Luca clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers from the park petals, already a little wilted. "We weren't sure if we needed a tie," Jonas said softly. Evelyn allowed herself the smallest smile. "You're perfect. Come in." Luca's eyes widened at the vaulted ceilings and open space, the subtle elegance of everything. But Jonas's gaze didn't wander. It stayed on her, respectful, still. Dinner was quiet at first. Evelyn had made roasted chicken with rosemary and lemon, something she hadn't cooked herself in years. She hadn't realized how good it felt to set 3 places at a table meant for one. Luca, between bites, asked questions. "Did you always live here? Is that real art? Do all CEOs have elevators in their houses?" Evelyn laughed. Really. Laughed for the first time in weeks. "Not all of them, just the lonely ones who work too much." The boy tilted his head. "You don't seem lonely tonight." Her hand paused over her wine glass. Jonas looked at her quietly. After Luca had finished his slice of apple pie and nodded off on the couch wrapped in one of her oversized throws, the room fell into a gentler silence. Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee and joined Jonas by the window. "She would have loved this," he said, nodding toward his son. She always wanted him to see a life with possibility. Evelyn watched Jonas's reflection in the glass. "Was she like you smarter?" he said without hesitation. "More hopeful. I taught languages. She taught me how to forgive people I hadn't even met yet." A silence passed between them, not uncomfortable but full of something unspoken. "I read your original thesis," Evelyn said finally. Jonas's brow lifted slightly. "It wasn't just academic," she continued. "It was human. The way you connected language recovery with dignity. It wasn't about theory. It was about giving people a voice again. And I'm starting to understand why they tried to take yours." Jonas didn't respond right away. He sipped his coffee, watching the city breathe below. "Why didn't you fight back?" she asked. Her voice had softened. This wasn't a CEO asking an employee. This was a woman asking a man she respected. He met her eyes. "I wanted to. God, I wanted to scream the truth from every rooftop. But I looked at Luca, and I knew if I fought dirty, even to win, he'd grow up thinking that was the way. I'd rather him learn what it means to live with peace in your chest than vengeance in your veins." Evelyn blinked fast. "My mother," she said, voice tightening, "was a house cleaner. She scrubbed marble floors just like the one in Alara's lobby. One night, she collapsed in the building she cleaned. No one called 911 for an hour, because she wore a janitor uniform, because they thought she didn't matter." Jonas inhaled deeply, his face shifting with the quiet weight of understanding. "I built Alara," she continued, "because I thought power was the only way to make sure no one like her was ever ignored again. But I forgot something important, something your son reminded me of in that lobby." "What's that?" he asked gently. "That sometimes power doesn't protect the good, it hides the corrupt." She turned toward him fully. Her eyes were glassy but her voice clear. "I see you, Jonas Hale, and I see what they did to you, what they tried to erase. And I swear to you, if I have to burn down the entire boardroom to restore what they took from you, I will." He didn't speak. He just reached across and touched her hand, gentle, quiet, sure. "You don't have to burn anything," he said. "Just promise me you'll start seeing the janitor before the title." Her voice cracked. "I already do." They stood their hands barely touching, hearts somehow closer than words could define. Outside, the city kept pulsing. But inside Evelyn Hart's home, something had shifted. A reckoning had begun, not of vengeance, but of restoration. And in the quiet glow of that night, something more than justice stirred. Something like love. The janitor's closet was quieter than usual. Jonas sat alone on the wooden bench, elbows on his knees, staring down at his palms, calloused, weathered, steady. The same hands that once wrote lectures on ancient dialects now scrubbed conference room coffee stains. He didn't regret the work. Honest hands never shamed him. But he could feel something shifting. In the air, in the walls. He'd felt this once before, the moment right before a trap snapped shut. There was a knock. Helen Kersey, Evelyn's longtime assistant, poked her head in. Her usual sharp tone was softer tonight. "Mr. Hale." "Miss Hart's in the executive lounge. She asked if you'd come up." Jonas stood slowly. Of course. As he walked the glass halls of Alaritech, something felt off. Too many glances, too many doors that closed just a second too late. When he entered the executive lounge, Evelyn wasn't there. Instead, Trent Malden leaned against the marble counter sleeves, rolled up, drink in hand. His smirk was razor thin. "Quite the rise," Professor Trent drawled. "From janitor to dinner guest to whatever Evelyn's grooming you for. Impressive." Jonas didn't blink. "If you called me up here to measure power, I'm not the one who'll need a ruler." Trent's smile faltered just for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and tossed a piece of paper onto the glass table. You recognize that Jonas picked it up. A printed email, his name in the sender line. The words burned as he read them, venomous accusations against Evelyn, questioning her leadership, her morals. Personal, cruel. It wasn't just a forged message, it was a character assassination. "I didn't write this," Jonas said calmly, holding the page between two fingers like it stank. "No," Trent said, sipping his drink. "Shame. Because it's already been sent to the board. You know how jumpy investors get when a CEO's judgment is compromised." Jonas met his gaze. "You're afraid of what she's becoming, of who she sees through now." Trent stepped forward, voice lower. "I'm afraid of sentiment replacing structure, of charity replacing merit. You may have fooled her with your tragic wisdom act, but I know who you are, a scandal with a mop. I'd rather be a scandal with integrity than a suit without a soul." Jonas replied. Trent's jaw tensed. At that moment, Evelyn entered. She stopped cold, taking in the two men, the email still in Jonas's hand. "What's going on?" she asked, voice clipped. Trent moved first. "Phone. I had to bring this to you directly. This email was circulated to the board anonymously, but I verified the server it came from Jonas's account." Jonas turned to her. "It's a fake," Trent added smoothly. "That's exactly what someone would say if they got caught." Evelyn's eyes searched Jonas's. For the first time in days there was doubt. Not much, but enough to burn. "You need to leave us," she told Trent quietly. Trent hesitated, then left his shadow lingering even after the door shut. Evelyn looked at Jonas, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally she asked, "Is there any chance?" "No," Jonas said. "None. I would never write that. Not about you, not about anyone. I want to believe you. Then do." Her silence said more than she wanted it to. There were rules to being CEO. Boundaries she wasn't allowed to cross, not even for the truth. "The board's meeting in the morning," she said. "They want you out." Jonas nodded slowly. "Of course they do. I'm fighting it, don't." "Jonas, don't," he repeated gently. "If you push back now, they'll come for you too. And Alara needs someone who believes in tomorrow." She stepped closer. "And what about you?" He gave a small, tired smile. "I believe in something smaller, quieter, like raising a boy who doesn't see the world through revenge." Her voice cracked. "You don't deserve this." "No," he said, reaching for the door. "But I've learned. When the world knocks you down for standing tall, don't kneel. Walk away taller." She touched his arm, fingers trembling. "Jonas, wait." He paused. She searched for the right words. "What do I tell them?" He looked back, his voice low, steady. "Tell them the janitor left quietly, but not because he was guilty, because he was proud." When he stepped out, Evelyn stood alone in the room. Elsewhere in the building, back in the maintenance wing, Luca was waiting on the same bench Jonas had sat on earlier, legs swinging nervously. When he saw his father, he jumped up. "Are we going home?" Jonas nodded, kneeling to zip up his son's backpack. Luca glanced behind him. "Did you get fired?" A pause. Jonas met his eyes. "Not fired, just released. Like when a kite string breaks and the sky gets bigger." Luca looked confused but nodded, trusting. As they walked down the back stairs away from the spotlight and politics, Evelyn watched them from her office window. She couldn't hear their conversation, but she could see the boy reach up and take his father's hand. And she could see that hand, steady, humble, calloused from labor and from life, tighten in return. Jonas never looked back, but Evelyn didn't look away. Not once. "Let the record show," the chairman began. His voice echoed through the boardroom like cold steel. "This emergency session has been convened to address the integrity breach tied to an internal memo attributed to Mr. Jonas Hale." Jonas stood at the far end of the long obsidian table. No uniform today, just a dark jacket, the same hands folded calmly in front of him. The janitor without a mop, but never without dignity. Across the table, Evelyn sat straight backed, a professional mask hiding the fire in her chest. She hadn't slept, not since watching Jonas walk out the night before. And yet, here he was, voluntarily, returning not to plead, but to testify. Mr. Hale, the chairman, said, adjusting his spectacles, "We offered you the option to submit a written resignation. Instead, you requested this hearing." Why, Jonas looked up. His voice, when it came, was neither loud nor aggressive, but it carried the weight of someone who'd held truth long enough for it to grow heavy. "Because what's at stake here isn't just my name, it's hers." All eyes shifted to Evelyn. Her expression flickered almost imperceptibly. "Because you can believe I'm replaceable," Jonas continued, "and you'd be right. But if you let this lie take her down with me, you won't just lose a janitor, you'll lose the last honest part of this company." A murmur rippled down the table. Trent, in his tailored arrogance, leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, we have verifiable metadata showing the message came from your company account. What other explanation could there possibly be?" Jonas met his gaze head-on. "I never logged that message. But I did use that terminal one time when Evelyn asked me to input safety feedback directly into the system. I left it unlocked. That was my mistake." He turned, addressing the full board now. "But that vulnerability didn't write the message. A person did. Someone who had access. Someone who wanted her gone and saw me as a disposable tool to do it." "Are you accusing a board member another executive demanded?" "No," Jonas replied evenly. "I'm accusing someone without the spine to speak truth in the light." Trent chuckled. "So you admit carelessness but expect us to overlook the consequences?" "No," Jonas said. "I expect you to look deeper than convenience. Ask yourselves, why would I, a janitor, target a CEO who showed me and my son nothing but kindness?" His voice softened. "Why would I attack the first person in this building who saw me as more than a mop and a paycheck?" He looked at Evelyn. "She gave me dignity, and I won't let you weaponize that into suspicion." Long silence followed. Then one of the board members, a woman with snow-white hair and steely eyes, spoke. "Mr. Hale, you said she saw you. What exactly did she see?" Jonas hesitated only a second. "She saw a man who lost everything, status, career, even self-worth, but kept working. Kept teaching his son right from wrong. Kept showing up." He glanced around. "That's more than I can say for some of the degrees in this room." There was no anger in his voice. Just truth, sharp and clean. "And what did you see in her?" the woman asked. Jonas smiled softly. "Someone who carries the weight of a company on her shoulders but still found time to ask about a boy's school science project. Someone who made space at her table for someone like me, not because she had to, but because she wanted to." Evelyn looked down, the weight of his words hitting places deeper than her ribs. Jonas continued, voice firmer now. "I don't want my job back. This isn't about that, but I won't let my silence be the stone they throw at her." Another pause. Then, from the far side of the room, a new voice spoke. "I can verify Mr. Hale's claim." All heads turned. Helen Kersey stepped forward from the back wall, her usual clipboard forgotten, her gaze sharp. "I overheard Trent Malden instruct an IT technician to access Jonas's terminal," she said, every word crisp. "It was 2 nights ago. He thought I'd gone home." Trent stood abruptly. "That's absurd." "It's true," Helen interrupted. "And I'm prepared to testify under oath." The room exploded in whispers. The chairman banged his gavel. "Enough." He turned to Trent, whose face had turned several shades paler. We'll investigate your conduct immediately. You are to vacate your position pending a full inquiry." Trent stormed out muttering threats. No one stopped him. The chairman looked back at Jonas. "You may step down." But Jonas didn't move. One last thing he said. He turned to Evelyn. "For every building like this, there's 1,000 people like me. Sweeping, fixing, keeping things standing, invisible until something breaks." He exhaled. "I'm just one voice. But if mine reminded you to look down the hallway once in a while, to see who's holding your company up, then I'll call this a good day." He nodded to the board. "Thank you," and walked out, shoulders straight, eyes calm. He didn't wait for applause. But as the doors closed behind him, Evelyn stood. "I'm reinstating him." The board stirred. "He said he doesn't want his job back," someone noted. Evelyn looked toward the door he'd just exited. "Then maybe we need to offer something more than a job." She smiled faintly. Something worthy of honest hands. The boardroom was silent, almost reverent. Evelyn Hart stood at the head of the long obsidian table, the glow of the screen behind her casting soft light onto the faces of a dozen decision-makers. Each of them had watched the same footage. Over and over again. Jonas Hale standing motionless while being mocked, his silence louder than rage. And then Luca's voice, steady and unshaken, narrating the quiet dignity of a father he refused to see erased. Evelyn closed her laptop gently. "What we just saw wasn't a scandal," she said. "It was a mirror. No one dared speak." She looked to Trent's now empty seat. He hadn't shown up. HR would handle that. She didn't need to. The truth had already drawn its line in stone. Evelyn took a deep breath. "It's not enough to fire one man and move on like nothing happened. We let this happen. We built systems that rewarded charm over character, noise over integrity. Jonas Hale didn't lose his title because he failed. We failed him." An older board member cleared his throat. "Ms. Hart, what do you propose?" Evelyn's voice didn't waver. "We repair more than his name. We let his legacy become something that lives here, not in silence." 2 weeks later, Jonas stood at the edge of the newly renovated wing of Alara Tech, staring at the words stenciled in brushed silver above the frosted glass doors, "The Studio of Tomorrow, a place for language, for healing, for those forgotten." He blinked once, then twice. Luca, standing at his side, tugged his sleeve. "Dad, that's your name under the quote." Sure enough, beneath the tagline in clean serif letters, "Founded by Dr. Jonas Hale." He looked at Evelyn, who stood quietly a few paces away. She wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, not a trace of her usual armor. For once, she didn't look like a CEO, just a woman proud of something built with the right hands. "I told them to keep the title," she said softly, catching his glance. "It's yours, and it never stopped being yours." Jonas let out a slow breath. "I'm not sure I remember how to be that man." She stepped closer. "You don't have to be him. Just be the man who raised a boy brave enough to tell the truth to the world." That made him smile. Inside, the studio was warm and filled with light natural wood floors, bookshelves lining the walls, interactive whiteboards, and a circle of desks arranged more like a community center than a classroom. But it wasn't the decor that made Jonas's chest tighten. It was the people waiting inside. Custodial staff, security guards, cafeteria workers, delivery drivers, admin assistants. Each of them had signed up for Jonas's first class, not for a certificate, but for the chance to learn how to speak again truly confidently and without apology. Jonas turned to Evelyn. "You did all this?" She shook her head. "We did this. You gave me the language. I just built the room." Later that afternoon, Jonas stood before the class with a marker in hand. He hesitated for a moment, looking out at the people seated before him, some in uniforms, some in hoodies, all in hope. Then he wrote one word on the board. "Voice." "What is this?" he asked. A woman near the front. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, trembling hands answered. "A noun. Something you have or lose." Jonas nodded. "Yes, but it's also something you build, and sometimes something you give." He paused. "My name is Jonas Hale. Some of you know me as a janitor, Some of you may have heard the stories, but I want you to know me as something simpler, someone who once forgot how to speak for himself, and now I teach language not for power, but for dignity." He looked at each of them. "In this room, we speak not just to be heard, but to remember we matter." Luca, seated in the back with a proud grin and a notebook full of drawings, raised his hand. "Dad, can I be the first to answer?" Jonas laughed. "You always are." "What does voice mean to me?" Luca stood and read from a sheet he'd clearly rehearsed 100 times. "It's not just what you say. It's what you do when people say nothing back." The room was silent. Then, one by one, the students clapped soft at first, then rising like a wave of belief finally given permission to break. Later, as the sun dipped beyond the skyscrapers, Evelyn lingered near the door watching father and son clean the whiteboards together. "You know, she said this was never about redemption." Jonas raised a brow. "No." She shook her head. "It was about restoration. You didn't need to be fixed, Jonas. You needed to be seen. And so did every person who ever walked these halls in silence." He leaned on the marker tray, arms crossed. Funny how the smallest voices carry the most weight. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "Stay," she said. He blinked. "In the program, no," her voice barely above a whisper. "In my life." Jonas didn't answer at first. He glanced toward Luca, who now laughed with 2 janitors over a spilled box of markers. Then he looked back at Evelyn. "Only if we walk it with honest hands." She smiled, soft and real. And for the first time, neither of them was standing alone. The sun poured soft golden light over the atrium of Alaratech. A banner stretched across the glass-paneled entryway read in elegant lettering, "The Studio of Tomorrow, Grand Opening." Inside, the hum of quiet conversation mingled with the scent of fresh coffee and the subtle notes of lavender drifting from a nearby planter. It wasn't just another corporate event. Something about today felt sacred. Jonas Hale adjusted his collared shirt, a modest sky-blue piece Evelyn had picked out for him. It wasn't new, but it was freshly pressed, and for Jonas that felt like armor enough. His calloused hand straightened Luca's collar next. "You good, Jonas?" asked his voice low. Luca grinned, his small hand gripping a folded piece of paper. "Better than good." Evelyn appeared at the far end of the hall, not in her usual power suit, but in a soft ivory blouse tucked into jeans. Her hair was down, her smile relaxed. It was the first time she looked, not like a CEO, but like a person finally breathing freely. "You clean up all right?" she teased, approaching them. Jonas chuckled. "Don't get used to it. My mop doesn't like to be ignored for too long." Luca looked between them, the corners of his mouth curling into the kind of knowing smirk that only a child could get away with. The event began with soft music and a quiet sense of anticipation. Employees, board members, and local families filled the space, many of them former skeptics who now stood proudly in support. On stage stood a wooden podium, a single microphone, and behind it a large projection of the studio's mission, to give voice to the unheard. To restore dignity with language. To heal from the inside out. Evelyn took the stage first. Her words were steady but brimming with emotion. "We built hospitals for healing the body, labs for advancing science. But today, we open a space that heals something deeper, the soul. The Studio of Tomorrow isn't just a program. It's a promise that no matter what your title, your voice matters here." She paused, her eyes finding Jonas and Luca in the front row. And the man who reminded us of that promise, who made us remember who we are, is someone who once scrubbed the marble floors of this very lobby. His name is Jonas Hale, and he never stopped being a teacher even when we stopped seeing him. Applause thundered through the hall. Jonas stepped onto the stage slowly, not shy, just careful. Every footstep felt like a lifetime being rewritten. He adjusted the microphone, then began. "There's a story I want to share." He looked at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all listening. There once was a man who lost everything he thought made him valuable. His title, his research, his place in the world. He picked up a mop, not because he forgot who he was, but because he didn't want his son to forget what dignity looked like. A hush fell over the crowd. But here's what I learned. It's not the title in front of your name that tells the truth about you. It's how you walk through the world when no one is watching, when people laugh, when doors shut, when you're cleaning up someone else's mess and still choose to smile. He glanced toward Luca. That man found home not in walls or accolades, but in a little boy who believed in him more than the world ever did. Jonas stepped back, voice cracking just slightly. "Thank you for letting me find my way back." The crowd stood in a standing ovation, but it was what came next that no one expected. Luca stepped forward, holding the sheet of paper he'd gripped all morning. Evelyn gently handed him the mic. "My name is Luca Hale. I'm 8 years old, and I wrote something for my dad." Jonas froze a hand going to his chest. Evelyn rested hers gently on his shoulder. Luca cleared his throat. His voice was small but certain. "I don't know how many letters come after my dad's name. I just know what comes before it: honest, brave, kind." He looked up at Jonas, eyes glowing. "Some people have degrees. Some people have desks. My dad had neither, but he had me. And I always knew I was safe, because his hands never let go even when the world did. There wasn't a dry eye in the room." Jonas knelt, arms wide. Luca ran into them, clutching his father tightly. The applause came again, but softer this time. Reverent, as if no one wanted to break the sacredness of the moment. Evelyn stepped beside them, crouching so her eyes met Luca's. "Hey, Professor Hale," she whispered, her smile playful. "Think I could be your next student?" Luca nodded solemnly. "Only if you bring snacks." They all laughed, real unguarded laughter that filled the studio like music. That evening, after the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Jonas and Evelyn stood by the window of the studio. Outside, the skyline shimmered, but in here it felt like a different kind of city, one built on second chances and the quiet strength of good people. Evelyn turned to Jonas. "Do you regret not fighting harder back then?" Jonas shook his head. "No. If I had, I might have won the battle, but I would have lost what mattered." He looked down at her hand, slowly intertwining his fingers with hers. "Now I teach people how to speak again, not to defend themselves, but to believe they deserve to be heard." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. "You didn't just teach us language, Jonas. You taught us character," he smiled, "and you reminded me I still had one. The janitor, the CEO, the child. 3 lives forever changed by words, by silence, by love. And somewhere in the heart of a city that almost forgot what dignity looked like, the studio of tomorrow glowed softly through the night. A beacon for every soul who once walked invisible. A home, finally. For voices that refused to be erased. For hands that never stopped being honest. And for hearts that dared to heal. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that changes the world. It's the quiet one. The one that keeps speaking when no one else dares. If this story moved something in you, a memory, a hope, a belief in the power of kindness, then maybe you too understand the worth of honest hands. I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Which part of the world are you tuning in from tonight? Let me know in the comments. Your voice matters here, and if you believe the world needs more stories like this, of healing, of dignity, of second chances, then I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story that just might speak to your soul. Thank you for spending your time with me. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and keep believing in the quiet power of good people.